A gun cleared the table. Chrome .38 pointed at Marlon Brando's chest. Anthony Scarpa holding it. 12 made men watching. This wasn't a movie set. 24 hours from now, either Brando would be uninsurable or Scarpa would be dead. No middle ground in rooms like this. If Brando flinched, if he showed fear, if he gave them anything, The Godfather died before Coppola ever called. Every studio would mark him radioactive. Insurance companies would refuse coverage. His name would become poison. $1 million contracts would vanish. The role that would define American cinema would go to someone else. One bad second. Career over. The Colombo family controlled the docks Brando had just exposed in on the waterfront. They'd lost face when 2 million Americans watched their business on screen. Territory exposed. Methods revealed. Power questioned. Now their enforcer held a loaded gun on the actor who'd done it. Door locked from outside. Windows faced brick. Kitchen exit led through corridor where 2 Colombo soldiers waited. Both armed. Both watching the only way out. 12 witnesses at the table. 1 gun. No exits. This was the private dining room of Rouse, East Harlem, the kind of place where men disappeared between courses. You embarrassed people, Scarpa said. Gun steady despite the sweat. Important people. Brando's wine glass sat untouched. His breathing remained even. The only movement, a shift forward. Not away from the gun. Into it. 6 inches closer to the barrel. Close enough that the physics became undeniable. Terry Malloy was fiction, Brando replied. Fiction that looked like us. Time burning. Each second without resolution pushed someone closer to a mistake. The waiter had vanished at first sight of steel. The owner, Tony Castellano, pressed against his office door, calculating whether his insurance covered what was about to happen. Everyone at the table understood. Next move defined the night. Maybe we stop this. Harry Cohn's representative, 3 seats away, hands shaking as he reached for water that wouldn't help. Maybe we discuss. Shut up. Scarpa didn't look away from Brando. The interruption made things worse. Now backing down meant weakness. Now the gun weighed more than metal. It weighed reputation. Vincent Gigante stopped cutting his veal. Genovese family muscle. 23 kills to his name. He recognized the shift. The moment before violence. Someone was going to move. Soon. The kitchen corridor. 2 shooters. Magazines full. Safety off. They'd heard the conversation stop. Heard the silence that meant weapons. Now they waited. Nobody left early from a Colombo sit-down. Not when steel was showing. Brando set down his wine glass. Deliberate. Precise. The small click made 2 men flinch. Then he did something nobody expected. He leaned forward. Not dramatically. Just enough. Another 6 inches toward the barrel. Close enough that missing became impossible. Close enough that powder burns were guaranteed. His eyes never left Scarpa's. Not the gun. The man. 37 takes, Brando said quietly. Confusion flickered across Scarpa's face. The gun stayed level but uncertainty entered his grip. The taxi scene. With Rod Steiger. Brando's voice carried the same control that broke veteran actors in rehearsal. 37 takes. Different choices each time. You know what I learned? Silence stretched. Someone's breathing got louder. Ice melted into expensive whiskey nobody was drinking. 12 made men are watching you decide between your reputation and 20 to life. Right now, while Tommy Lucchese stands in that doorway, while photographers wait outside, while every second makes this harder to walk back. Scarpa's eyes flickered. To the witnesses, each one connected, each one dangerous. To Lucchese, commission member, whose presence changed every rule. To the reality, this wasn't a back alley with no witnesses. This was a room full of men who'd remember, who'd talk, who'd judge. Anthony, lower it. Lucchese's order cut through smoke and silence. But Scarpa had already committed. The gun was out. The threat was made. Backing down now meant career death of a different kind. In his world, you didn't pull a weapon unless you used it. The gun stayed level. His hands started shaking. Knuckles white. Metal slippery with sweat. The tremor traveling up his arm. He understands, Brando said, still watching Scarpa, not acknowledging Lucchese. Question is whether you understand that 12 made men just watched you threaten an Academy Award winner. At a sit-down. During business. Over a film that's already in theaters. That's already made its money. That's already history. Each word landed like a hammer on glass. The truth of the position. No clean exit. Someone had to lose face. Someone had to bleed reputation. And with FBI photographers stationed outside, with press following Brando's every move, with tabloid reporters paying waiters for gossip, this story would travel fast. The gun trembled worse. Not just the hand now. The whole arm. Every second that passed made it worse. Made the eventual ending harder to control. Made the consequences multiply. Frank Costello watched from his corner table. 5 decades in this life. Survived Luciano, survived Genovese, survived wars that left hundreds dead. He'd seen killers and actors, politicians and priests. But this, actor staring down a gun like it was just another prop, this was new. This was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with bullets. Jimmy Blue Eyes sat perfectly still. Meyer Lansky's man, the accountant who knew where every body was buried because he'd paid for the shovels. His presence meant the Jewish mob was watching too. This wasn't just Colombo business anymore. This was everybody's business. Brando reached out. The movement changed everything. Slow, deliberate, every inch telegraphed. His hand moved through the space between them like it was thick water. No sudden gestures. No grab for the weapon. Just motion with clear intent. The room stopped breathing. 12 men who'd ordered deaths over coffee watched an actor reach toward a loaded gun held by a killer who'd already crossed the line. Palms settled over Scarpa's gun hand. Not grabbing, not fighting, just contact. Skin on skin. Warm on cold sweat. The kind of touch that between other men might mean friendship. Here it meant something else. Recognition, professional understanding, acknowledgement that they were both trapped in a scene neither had asked to perform. We're both working, Brando said quietly. The words meant for Scarpa alone, but everyone heard. Let's finish like professionals. 10 seconds. Neither man moved. The gun remained pointed at Brando's chest, but now they held it together. Shared weight, shared moment, shared decision. In that position, they weren't actor and enforcer. They weren't Hollywood and Brooklyn. They were two men finding a way out of a corner that had no good exits. Scarpa's breathing changed. The shake traveled from his arm to his chest. The weight of 12 watching eyes. The weight of Lucchese's presence. The weight of consequences that would last longer than bullets. The mathematics of the moment. Kill Brando and become the man who murdered America's greatest actor over a movie. Lower the gun and become the soldier who backed down. No good choices. Only professional ones. The gun lowered. Slow. So slow that each inch took a year off somebody's life. Controlled enough that everyone could track the movement, could see the decision being made. Brando's hand stayed on Scarpa's until metal touched white tablecloth, then withdrew with the same deliberate grace. No smile, no relief, just acknowledgement of what had been avoided. Salat. Brando raised his wine glass. The gesture encompassing the entire table. Half the room responded from muscle memory. Glasses lifted. Wine sip. The ordinary ritual of a business dinner asserting itself over the extraordinary. But everyone knew, finished. The gathering was done. Within minutes, excuses emerged. Early meetings. Prior commitments. Other obligations. The dissolution happened with the efficiency of professionals who knew when to exit. Jimmy Breslin would later write that watching those men leave was like watching a photograph fade. Each departure carefully timed. No rush. No panic. Just the steady evacuation of men who understood that some moments needed to end quickly. Scarpa left without words. The unfired gun disappeared into his coat. Weight different now. His reputation would survive, barely. The story that would circulate. Brando had shown proper respect. Understanding had been reached. Honor had been satisfied without blood. Better than the truth, that an actor had taught an enforcer something about power in 10 seconds of shared contact. The kitchen soldiers lowered their weapons when Scarpa passed. The crisis traveling through walls without words. They'd know soon enough. Everyone would. Only 3 remained when the waiter finally emerged from whatever prayer closet he'd found. Brando, Lucchese, and the restaurant owner who looked like he'd aged 5 years in 15 minutes. You handled that well, Lucchese observed, lighting a cigarette with hands that had signed death warrants without shaking. Practice. Brando's smile was tired. Real. Studio executives pull the same moves. They just use contracts instead of bullets. Scarpa's young, eager to make his bones. He'll make them, just not with mine. Lucchese studied the actor through smoke. The man who'd just stared down a loaded .38 like it was another camera angle. Who'd turned a death threat into a teaching moment. Who'd won without winning, which in certain circles was the only victory that mattered. You really weren't afraid. Statement, not question. But Brando answered anyway. Fear is a choice. Like any other emotion, you use it or refuse it, and if he'd pulled the trigger, then we'd both be famous for the wrong reasons. The simplicity carried its own weight. Lucchese nodded once, a gesture that among certain men meant more than signed contracts. Your next picture. You need longshoremen, construction crews, any union support, you come to me. Direct, not through the usual channels. Me. The offer was worth millions. Not in money, in access, in protection, In the kind of cooperation that meant no mysterious accidents, no inexplicable delays, no union troubles. Ever. Brando understood, nodded. Some gifts you accepted by acknowledging them. 3 weeks later, tabloids would run their stories. Brando dines with Italian businessmen. Speculation wild and mostly wrong. One photo showed him leaving that night, coat collar turned up against winter wind, expression unreadable. The photographer had been paid by 3 different papers. What the photo didn't show was Anthony Scarpa holding the door. Both men nodding. Professionals. The gun never cleared leather again. Not for Brando. Some men you threatened. Others you simply acknowledged. The actor had taught him the difference in 10 seconds of shared silence over a weapon that stayed unfired. Back at the Sherry Netherland, Brando poured himself a scotch. Good scotch. The kind you drank alone. Stood at windows overlooking Central Park. His hands were steady. They'd been steady in the restaurant too, but only he knew the effort that required. The physical control needed when every instinct said move. The phone rang 3 times before he crossed to it. Kazan, probably, having heard something through channels. Or the studio, worried about their investment. Their star, their property. He let it ring. Tomorrow he'd return to being Hollywood's most challenging star. The actor who fought for control. Who demanded perfection. Who made studios rich while making them crazy. Tonight, he'd earned the right to drink in peace. To let the adrenaline metabolize. To let the performance end. The wine glass from dinner sat on his bar. He'd insisted on buying it from the owner who'd tried to gift it. Now it caught city lights like evidence. Not of the threat survived, not of the violence avoided, but of the performance given. The role no script had prepared him for, himself, at a table where method acting met methodology, where pretending met reality, where the audience carried guns instead of opinions. He'd played many iconic parts. Stanley Kowalski, who burned with need. Terry Malloy, who chose conscience over comfort. Mark Antony, who turned words into weapons. But perhaps none requiring more precision than Marlon Brando, seated across from men who didn't deal in fiction, showing them that sometimes the greatest power was refusing to perform at all. The glass caught light differently from this angle, like a prism breaking white into colors, like possibility, like a prop from a scene no camera captured. Some stories stayed in the rooms where they happened, between the men who lived them, in the silence that said more than any dialogue could. This was one of them. A story about an actor who understood his audience perfectly, men who respected only what couldn't be fake. Years would pass. The wine glass would outlive them all, move from apartment to house to final home. Estate sale catalogs would list it simply, wine glass, provenance unknown, slight chip on rim, valued at $15. Sold to a collector who had no idea they were buying evidence of the night Marlon Brando proved that the greatest performances weren't always given on stage, but in Brooklyn social clubs, in rooms where men still gathered to discuss business that wouldn't make newspapers. Old men would tell the story. How Hollywood came to dinner. How steel met method. How an actor taught a soldier that sometimes the scene ended not with action, but with understanding. The details would blur with telling. The caliber of the gun would change. The number of witnesses would grow or shrink, but the ending remained constant. Brando reaching across the table, placing his hand over the weapon, and speaking the kind of truth that didn't require rehearsal. We're both professionals. In a world where professional meant specific and often final things, the words carried weight beyond their simplicity. They were recognition, absolution, a way forward that honored both men without diminishing either. The real lesson of that night, sometimes the best scene was the one you refused to play. The restaurant closed in 1987, but before demolition, someone removed the corner booth. Entire banquette, carefully extracted, relocated to a warehouse in Queens. Preservation of a different kind of history, because some moments couldn't be captured on film. Some truths existed only in consequence and memory. The Godfather would film 8 years later. Brando would transform himself into Don Corleone, win his second Oscar, create a character that defined American cinema's vision of organized power. Critics would praise the authentic portrayal, the quiet menace, the understood rules. They never knew he'd already played the scene that mattered. Without cameras, without scripts, without any performance at all. That night in the restaurant, seated across from real guns and real consequences, Marlon Brando had shown 12 dangerous men something they rarely encountered: power exercised through stillness, authority claimed through calm, victory achieved by refusing to fight. And somewhere in that truth, between raised weapon and lowered gun, between method and methodology, American cinema's most dangerous actor gave his most authentic performance. Not as any character, as himself, a professional among professionals. The eyes that refused to look away.